So I thought I would begin by telling a little story about a journey, because that is what the first reading is all about, is a journey. And I was going out west. I was associate pastor at St. Bridget at the time, and I was going out west to see my brother Mark. He had tickets to a convention, and he had his company pay for the entire hotel and everything like that, and all I had to do was pay for the airfare, which is a pretty nice deal because, you know, poor parish priest. They barely feed us. Anyway, so I bought my tickets, and the only thing I had to do was I had to fly separate from him. So I bought Southwest Airlines because we were going out west for this convention. And so when I bought the Southwest Airlines, I don't know how they do it anymore because I haven't flown Southwest in a few years, probably since this incident, that, you know, you had your A line, you had your B line, you had your C line, depending on when you checked in online. Now usually, folks, I am a solid A. I like to be early, I like to be in the front of the line, I don't like people to cut in front of me, but this particular day, I was a solid B. I had waited to the last minute, I guess for me, to register online. And so I stood there in the middle of the B line. There were people in front of me, the people behind me. The A line was to my right, I kind of envied them, and the C line was to my left. And I had pity upon them. And I was waiting there in line, and all of a sudden this couple comes up and stands beside me in the C line. It was quite clear that they were not married, because married people don't act like this. She looked up at him and she said, "You are so cute." And he looked back at her and he said, "No, you're cuter." And yes, and she looked up at him and she said, "No, you're the cutest." And he looked back at her as if to say no, and he said, "No, you're the cutest." And the lady in front of the line in front of me turned around and looked me in the eyes as if to say, "This is making me nauseous." To which, just with my eyes, I looked at her and I said, "No, I'm more nauseous." To which point she looked back at me and she said, "I think I'm going to be sick." My only consolation, folks, was that I was a solid B, they were a solid C. I was not going to have to sit next to this, because the cuteness continued on and on until we got on the flight. And so I got on the plane, and I was right in the middle of the airplane, and I sat next to this nice couple, and this young woman, a different young woman, comes up to me and she says, now I wasn't dressed as a priest, by the way. I was just sort of incognito because I was traveling out west and just a vacation. And she said, "Would you mind switching me seats? These are my parents, and I'd like to sit next to them." And I said, "You know what? I am a young man of good heart." I said I would be happy to do that. And so I stood up and I looked at the plane. There were only a couple seats left, and they were right in the back of the plane. And I thought, "Oh man, look at that! 3 seats in a row. I'm going to be able to put my feet up. I'm going to be right next to the bathroom if I need to go. This is kind of perfect." So I sat there and I got comfortable, and they were just about to close the airplane doors when guess who gets on? And there were only 2 seats left, and they were right next to me. I learned a lot that day. And the cuteness continued in many varied ways, and I tried to read my Time magazine and not pay any attention, and finally they got kind of sick of each other, and she was in the middle seat, and she turned to me and she says, "So what do you do for a living?" She tried a small talk. And I looked right at her and I said, "I am a Roman Catholic priest." They wouldn't even look at each other the rest of the flight. It was great. It's like a nuclear bomb had gone off in the plane. It's really good. Now, I tell that story because it's an illustration of what love is. And what they thought love was not exactly love. And you could tell that they weren't married because they were still in this, you know, lovey-dovey, romantic, everything's great, hunky-dory. And I call that LUV. It looks like love, it smells like love, it tastes like love, it has all the characteristics of what we think love should look like. But in fact, it is not. And of course, anybody that's been married probably, 3 days, learns the difference between LUV and LOVE. And you see, that is what we are called to do here. You see, we are like Moses. We are very much like Moses, and you can understand why I picked these readings. It's because Moses is leading his people through the desert. And they are a people that grumble, they are a people that don't always appreciate him, they are people that don't always LUV him, don't always feel like being around him, and complain all the time. And yet what he shows us through this journey in the desert is what love is, LOVE. And he shows us, I'm sure that he looked at these people sometimes and they were like little kids, the little kids and the high school kids that you guys serve that grumble and don't always do things the right way. And he looked on them with a great deal of love. And it was that great deal of love, L-O-V-E, that choice of doing what's right despite how we might feel. That choice to know the people that we serve. The choice of establishing heaven on earth. And He got them to the promised land, to the very banks of the Jordan before they crossed over. So much love did He had that He knew He was never going to cross over, and yet He continued to lead them. And you see, that is your task as well. As you lead the little children, the middle schoolers, the high schoolers, you are leading them toward the promised land. And the way that you do that, the way that you L-O-V-E them, and I guarantee you, anybody in this room will tell me that there are days and you would love to wring their little necks. But you love them so much that you bring Christ into their life. And that is what true L-O-V-E is. And that is what happens every time I have walked into a Catholic school, and it has not always been perfect, I admit. But there is a place where these children, like the children of Israel, like the little children that are received by Jesus in the gospel reading today, are shown through you and through your staff and through your teachers a glimpse of heaven. And not only that, but you tell them by the way that you act, by the way that you treat them, by the teaching that you give them, that in fact you do love them. And maybe you're going to see these kids grow up, and you get close to them, and you're never going to see them blossom into whatever they're going to be. But just like Moses, who had the same situation, he led them to the brink, and then let them go. You see, what you are called to do as the administrators of these schools is to provide the environment where these children can encounter heaven. Because that, my dear friends, is what love is. And that is what the journey is. Is that we are simply on our way to the promised land. But with the Eucharist, with prayer, with our Catholic culture, with everything that we have at our disposal, we don't have to wait for heaven. We can establish heaven on earth by teaching them about the love of God, by disciplining them, because disciplining a kid means that you love him or her, by maybe sacrificing your own feeling or your own pleasure so that these kids may be led to the experience of Christ, that their faith may flourish, and that they who are not Catholic may encounter the greatness and the tradition that the faith offers to you and to me. It is a faith and it is a tradition that comes from Christ Himself, who came to us, beckoning us like little children. And remember what He says in the Gospel. And remember this when the going gets tough, when you don't exactly L-U-V these little kids or these high school kids. But when you're called to love them, that when you receive one of these children, that you receive Christ Himself. And that will always make the journey so much more pleasant. I am not one of these people that likes to wait for things. I don't know if anybody else is like that. I don't want to wait for heaven. I want it to come here and now. And that is something that is within every single one of our powers. And all we have to do is look at this St. Clare that we celebrate today. This woman of beauty, this woman of scholarship, this woman of knowledge who established the Franciscan order that has probably in one way or another directly or indirectly affected our lives. And we see the benefit of what one teacher can do 7 centuries later. And all of us have that grace. All of us have that beauty. All of us have that ability, like St. Clare, to allow people to encounter Christ and to have a glimpse of heaven on earth. And what that means is we must keep our eyes on Christ. We must go after the lost sheep, as we hear in the Gospel. And we must faithfully lead these young people that we minister to, the teachers that you administer, to the promised land, which is not light years away, but happens every time we encounter the L-O-V-E of Christ Himself. And so we go from this place right now, from this homily, from hearing the Word of God, into the very meal, into the very banquet of love itself, where we become one with Christ. And then we go out to love